explained that unless I caught them in the act of committing a new crime or could show immediate danger, they were reluctant to get involved again without a judge's explicit order. That suited me just fine because I had a different plan forming in my mind, one that would make it crystal clear they were not welcome without laying a single finger on them. I spent the next few hours prepping the ranch like a man setting a trap, not for harm, but for undeniable proof. First, I checked the water system. Years ago, I had installed an underground sprinkler system designed to irrigate the lower pastures during dry spells. Most of the sprinklers were hidden in the grass and operated on timers. With a few adjustments, I reprogrammed the system to activate manually, with full pressure, and cover the entire south pasture where Karen and her followers had pitched their tents. It was harmless, just water after all, but enough to make camping a miserable experience. I grinned to myself as I imagined the chaos that was about to unfold. Around noon, I hopped on my ATV and made a slow loop around the property line, documenting everything with my phone. Karen and her little army were in full swing now. They had set up a row of buffet tables covered in salads, burgers, and pies. Someone had even brought a cotton candy machine. Kids were running wild, tearing up the fields, while adults lounged in camping chairs drinking soda and blaring music from massive portable speakers. It looked less like a retreat and more like a cheap festival thrown in the middle of nowhere. Karen, now wearing a sash that said HOA Queen in glitter letters, caught sight of me riding along the edge of the property and pointed dramatically. "He is stalking us again," she screeched. "Somebody call the sheriff." I kept my distance, stayed silent, and kept filming. That was important. I could not give them anything they could twist into aggression. I needed to be the calm one, the reasonable one, while Karen dug herself deeper into madness. When I was satisfied I had enough footage, I rode back up to the barn, parked, and activated the sprinkler system with the press of a button. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Hidden nozzles popped up from the ground with a hiss, and high-pressure jets of freezing cold well water erupted into the air. Within seconds, the south pasture was transformed into a muddy, soaking mess. Tents collapsed under the force of the spray. Plates of food were sent flying. Screams and shouts filled the air as adults and children alike ran for cover, slipping and sliding in the growing pools of mud. Karen stood in the middle of it all, drenched from head to toe, clutching her glittery sash like it was a life preserver. She tried to bark orders over the chaos, but nobody was listening anymore. Her subjects had abandoned ship. I stayed where I was, arms folded, watching from a safe distance. It was not just satisfying. It was necessary. They needed to understand that this land was not theirs to trample. Karen finally stumbled her way out of the spray and marched straight toward me, soaked, muddy, and furious beyond reason. "This is assault," she shrieked. "You are assaulting innocent families." I smiled politely and pointed at the sign mounted on the fence. "Private property. Trespassers will be soaked." I had added it last night as a little joke, but now it served as a perfect defense. Karen tried another tactic. She pulled out her phone and started live streaming, narrating dramatically about how an evil land baron was terrorizing hard-working HOA families. I just smiled wider and kept filming her antics right back. Every lie she spun was another nail in her coffin, especially when one of the drenched campers stomped past her, muttering about how he had told her this was a bad idea from the start. The cracks in her army were starting to show. As the afternoon wore on, more and more of her followers packed up and left. Trucks and SUVs rolled down the dirt road in a steady exodus. By sunset, only a handful of die-hard loyalists remained, clustered miserably around a single damp table like survivors of a shipwreck. Karen was red-eyed, furious, but still refusing to admit defeat. She spent most of the evening stomping around with her clipboard, taking notes and muttering about lawsuits and media coverage. I let her stew. I knew her options were running out fast. That night, as I sat by the fireplace with my dog curled up at my feet, I received an email from my lawyer. Attached were the formal trespass notices, complete with photo evidence, timestamps, and witness statements from a couple of neighboring ranchers who had seen the circus from the road. We would be filing in the morning. Karen had crossed every line she could, and now the consequences were coming whether she liked it or not. Still, I could not help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it all. Most people, when caught trespassing, would apologize, pack up, and leave with their dignity intact. Karen chose to escalate at every opportunity, digging herself into a hole so deep she might never find her way out. I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain. The battle for the ranch was just getting started. And this time, I was not just fighting for my land. I was fighting to make sure that people like Karen never thought they could bully or cheat their way into stealing something that did not belong to them. Not now. Not ever. The morning sun had barely started warming the fields when I made my way into town, feeling a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. Anger because Karen had pushed the situation so far beyond what should have been simple common sense. Satisfaction because I finally had everything lined up to hold her accountable in a way she could not weasel out of. In the passenger seat next to me sat a thick folder, packed with documents, photos, land surveys, and sworn statements. It felt like carrying a loaded weapon, only this weapon was legal and every shot fired would be clean and precise. I pulled into the county courthouse parking lot, grabbed my folder, and walked through the big glass doors with a steady step. Today was about more than just winning. It was about principle. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with the usual Monday morning business. People filed paperwork, argued quietly in corners, shuffled nervously outside of courtrooms. I spotted my lawyer near the clerk's office, her sharp business suit immaculate, her smile razor-thin. She waved me over and we went through the paperwork together one final time, double-checking every page. When we were satisfied, she slid the entire packet across the counter to the clerk, who stamped each document with a heavy thud. There it was. Official. Karen and her group were now formally charged with criminal trespass, destruction of property, and nuisance violations. A civil suit for damages would follow once the criminal side wrapped up. My lawyer also handed over copies of my restraining order appeal, set to be reviewed by a judge later that week. Karen's flimsy attempt at painting me as the aggressor was about to fall apart under the weight of real evidence. With the filings complete, I walked back outside feeling lighter. The wheels of justice might turn slowly, but once they start grinding, they are hard to stop. I figured Karen was still clinging to her fantasy of victory back at the ranch, probably plotting her next absurd move. What she did not know yet was that by the end of the day, she would be served formal papers requiring her to appear in court. No more games, no more fake HOA rules, no more sharp map. Just the cold, hard reality of the law. As predicted, when I got back to the ranch, Karen was still camped out with a handful of loyalists. Their numbers had dwindled dramatically. The once bustling campsite now looked pitiful, with sagging tents, scattered trash, and muddy ruts carved into the field. Karen spotted me driving up the main road and immediately stormed toward the fence, waving a stack of papers like they were weapons. "You are going to jail," she screeched. "We have filed an emergency injunction. You will be removed by force if necessary." I stayed seated in my truck, letting her rant, recording everything with my dashboard camera. It was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum after realizing nobody was coming to their tea party. About 20 minutes later, a county deputy rolled up the driveway, lights flashing but no siren. Karen puffed up with excitement, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Here it comes," she shouted to her followers. "Justice." The deputy stepped out, adjusted his hat, and walked straight past her to me. "Afternoon," he said politely. "Got some papers for you. Standard notification for a court hearing regarding that restraining order. Also, separate notice for the countersuit you filed. Here are your copies." He handed me 2 neatly folded packets, tipped his hat, and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, can I see you for a moment?" Karen strutted forward like she was being crowned queen. The deputy pulled out another set of papers and said calmly, you are being served. Court summons regarding criminal trespass, nuisance violations, and property damage. Failure to appear will result in a bench warrant. Karen's face froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You cannot be serious, she finally managed to choke out. I am the victim. He shrugged, clearly having heard it all before. Tell it to the judge, ma'am. The mood shifted instantly. Her remaining supporters started packing up faster than ants fleeing a flooded anthill. Karen shouted after them, pleading, threatening, cajoling, but nobody wanted to stick around for what was coming. I watched from my truck, a strange calm settling over me. It was not about gloating. It was about finally seeing consequences catch up to actions. Real, undeniable consequences. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, court appointments, and preparations. My lawyer worked fast and clean, anticipating every argument Karen might try to throw up as a smokescreen. On the day of the first hearing, I wore my best jeans and a clean button-down shirt, looking every bit the hard-working rancher who just wanted to protect his land. Karen showed up wearing a power suit 2 sizes too small and dragging a rolling suitcase stuffed with binders. She strutted into the courtroom like she was on a reality TV show, waving to the few reporters who had bothered to show up after hearing rumors about the case. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began with the restraining order issue. Karen's lawyer, a tired-looking man who probably regretted taking her case, argued that I had harassed and intimidated innocent citizens exercising their right to public land access. My lawyer stood up calmly and produced the land deeds, surveys, video footage, and sworn statements showing Karen trespassing, building structures without permission, and refusing lawful orders to leave. The judge barely let Karen's lawyer finish before slamming down his gavel and declaring the restraining order dissolved immediately. Next came the trespassing charges. Karen tried to argue that HOA bylaws superseded local property laws, a claim so ridiculous the judge actually leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead like he was fighting a migraine. When my lawyer pointed out that Karen's HOA was located several miles away and had no jurisdiction beyond its own neighborhood fences, the judge looked ready to throw her out of the building entirely. In the end, Karen was found guilty of trespass and nuisance violations. She was ordered to pay damages for the property destruction, clean up the mess her group had left, and perform 100 hours of community service at the local animal shelter. The best part came when the judge handed down a final ruling regarding access to the private roads leading to her neighborhood. Since they had used the private ranch roads without permission during their little expedition, and since maintenance of those roads was legally mine, the HOA would now have to pay a monthly maintenance fee to continue using the access roads. In other words, Karen's HOA would be cutting me a check every month indefinitely. Karen's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. It was a small miracle she did not faint on the spot. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I could not help but smile. The battle was over and the land had won. Not because I yelled the loudest or acted the meanest, but because I stood my ground, stayed smart, and trusted the truth to do the heavy lifting. Karen might have strutted in thinking she could rewrite the rules, but in the end, the land, the law, and a little stubborn patience had delivered a lesson she would never forget. The days that followed the court ruling felt like a long, slow exhale after holding my breath for weeks. The ranch returned to its normal rhythm, the cows grazing peacefully, the wind rustling through the tall grass, and the scent of fresh earth rising in the morning air. There were no more strange tents, no more shouted threats across the fields, no more blaring music disrupting the peace. It was as if the land itself had sighed in relief along with me. But the best part was not just the return to normalcy. It was watching Karen endure the consequences she had fought so hard to deny. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing justice unfold not in sudden explosions, but in quiet, steady steps that left no room for argument. Karen was ordered to begin her community service within 2 weeks of the ruling. The local animal shelter had taken great pleasure in accepting her assignment. The director, a grizzled old cowboy type with a sharp wit